There's a door on the Kansas prairie that no one has ever walked through twice. Locals won't speak of it. Maps erase it. And yet, it's there, hidden behind a rotting fence line, beyond a wheat field that never ripens. In the summer of 1878, 4 brothers walked into that place, and time stopped moving. Before start this story, please like and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon. They didn't age, they didn't die, they didn't come back, until they did. On a quiet morning in 2025, a farmhouse door creaked open that hadn't moved in 147 years, and 4 barefoot men walked into town, wearing 19th century clothes, speaking in biblical tongues, and claiming to be Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood, the brothers long presumed dead. But here's what no one tells you. They weren't lying. They hadn't aged a day. Their fingerprints matched the preserved county archives, and their blood work, classified by every agency that touched it. You were never meant to hear this story. Because what happened in Cedar Ridge, Kansas wasn't a haunting. It was an interruption of time, of God's order, of everything men pretend to control. These weren't ghosts. These weren't imposters. These were men removed from time, and something followed them back. For nearly 150 years, the Blackwood farmhouse sat untouched, its fields strangely barren, its windows miraculously unbroken. Locals said even the wind didn't move there. They called it cursed. But what if it wasn't cursed at all? What if it was sealed? You've heard of places where people disappear. Bermuda Triangle, missing 411. But what if there are places where people remain, endlessly looping in a single hour of reality, while the rest of us keep aging, forgetting, dying? That's what we're dealing with here. And the most terrifying part, the hour they're stuck in. It's not some peaceful limbo. It's a spiritual crucible, a replication of Judgment Day. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Because if the Blackwood brothers were taken, they weren't taken alone. This video is not for the faint of heart. We are about to uncover suppressed truths, hidden documents, forbidden faith rituals, and a government cover-up so vast it makes Roswell look like a misunderstanding. And once you hear what happens in Section 11, you'll understand why time itself might be broken. Shall we go deeper? The first time someone noticed something wrong with the Blackwood property wasn't during the typhoid outbreak. It was years later, long after the brothers had disappeared. A soil surveyor from Wichita named Horace Langley was sent by the state to document farmland conditions across Harper County. He arrived in Cedar Ridge in 1902 with a clipboard, a mule cart, and no patience for local folklore. But the moment he stepped onto the Blackwood land, his mule refused to move. Flat out refused. It brayed once, backed up violently, and collapsed in the road, foam pouring from its mouth like it had seen the end of the world. Langley, shaken but determined, walked the rest of the way to the farmhouse alone. He never made it inside. According to the single entry in his journal, the one written in a frantic, near illegible scrawl, he approached the front door and heard 4 voices praying inside, all speaking in unison, all saying the same word I could not recognize. But that word broke my knees. His boots were found 5 feet from the porch, empty. His body, never recovered. His journal was mailed anonymously to the State Geological Office 3 weeks later, wrapped in a blood-stained towel and sealed in beeswax. No prints, no trail. The house was marked cursed property on all subsequent maps, a term the government officially does not recognize, yet still used. The locals say if you walk past the Blackwood property line at midnight, you don't hear crickets. You hear hymns. 4 men praying for release. 4 men, or something wearing their faces. But here's what no one wants to ask. If they were praying, who were they praying to? Because every account of that house since 1878, every journal, Every whisper, every dying confession, all agree on one thing. What's inside that house isn't trapped. It's anchored, and it doesn't want out. It wants us in. And you, yes, you watching this, you're closer to that threshold than you think. The official story claimed the Blackwood brothers vanished during the height of the 1878 epidemic, presumed victims of disease buried in unmarked graves somewhere on their land. But the truth, buried deeper than any coffin, tells us something far more disturbing. According to an 1880 letter penned by Reverend Silas Trent of the Cedar Ridge Methodist Church, kept hidden behind a false wall in the church attic until its accidental discovery in 1961, he and 3 elders paid a final visit to the Blackwood farm on the night of September 3, 1878, after reports that strange lights had been seen moving inside the chapel. They expected to find the brothers praying. What they found instead shattered their faith. The chapel was lit not by lanterns, but by a cold white glow pulsing from the stone altar itself. Ezra Blackwood stood before it, his face wet with blood, not his own, speaking in what Reverend Trent described as a language that sounded like thunder drowning in a well. The other 3 brothers knelt behind him in perfect symmetry, motionless, eyes open but unseeing. And then the air cracked. That's the word used, cracked, like a sheet of glass folding in on itself. Reverend Trent said time itself slowed. The candle in his hand froze mid-flicker. The seconds no longer moved in order. And then, with a sound that the letter described only as God turning his back, the 4 brothers vanished. Not walked out, not ran, not died. Just gone. The altar split in 2. The light went out. And for nearly a century, no one stepped foot in that chapel again, not willingly. Those who tried reported hallucinations, bleeding from the eyes, and in one case, the loss of exactly 1 hour from their life, later confirmed by their pocket watch and the town's mechanical clock. That missing hour, it always came back in dreams, and in those dreams the dreamer saw 4 figures standing just behind the veil of time, whispering a name that wasn't theirs. What is that name? No one who's lived long enough to describe it has ever spoken it aloud. And those who died trying, their mouths were sealed shut, stitched from the inside. In 1927, a federal team operating under the newly formed U.S. Bureau of Temporal Phenomena, an agency whose existence remains unacknowledged, dispatched 2 agents to Harper County under the guise of agricultural inspectors. Their classified objective: confirm the rumored anomalous atmospheric conditions on the Blackwood farm and, if possible, retrieve any biological evidence tied to the missing brothers. Only one of them returned. Agent Howard Keene was found wandering barefoot 15 miles south of Cedar Ridge, clutching a rusted lantern and muttering a string of biblical passages that made no coherent theological sense. He was committed to a federal sanatorium in New Mexico, where he spent the next 19 years drawing the same image over and over again. 4 identical men, suspended midair in a column of frozen light, mouths open in a silent scream, with their fingertips stretched backward against gravity. When the drawings were analyzed by military cryptographers, they discovered embedded sigil-like geometry, shapes that weren't supposed to exist in Euclidean space. Agent Keene died in 1946 with one phrase etched into the wall of his padded cell: "The hour is not empty." His partner, Agent Frank Caro, was never seen again. But here's the detail they buried under decades of silence. Keene's lantern, the one recovered with him, wasn't standard issue. It was a Blackwood family heirloom, last seen on the property in 1878, and catalogued in probate records from the brothers' estate. Yet the brass surface bore fingerprints too recent to explain, and inside the fuel chamber was a scrap of parchment, chemically aged beyond modern dating. On it was a single line written in Abel Blackwood's distinctive hand: "Tell them we are still kneeling, The sky never changed. This wasn't time travel. It was time folding. Reality doesn't loop. It echoes. And every few decades, that echo grows louder, clearer, closer. We are not observing history anymore. History is observing us, and it's choosing who will be next. By 1954, the Blackwood property had become a silent obsession for a very specific type of man, one who understood that the world ran on secrets, not laws. One of them was Dr. Lionel Grieg, a former physicist turned metaphysical researcher who had been quietly dismissed from the Los Alamos laboratory after publishing an internal paper titled Temporal Feedback Loops in Isolated Faith-Based Microcultures. What drew him to Cedar Ridge wasn't folklore. It was math. A pattern in the typhoid outbreak curves from 1878 revealed a time compression anomaly. Recorded deaths appeared to occur before symptoms were officially documented, as if something was pulling the endpoint of time closer to its origin. Grieg arrived with nothing but a Leica camera, a tape recorder, and a pocket watch his grandfather had given him, one that would stop ticking every time he approached within 200 yards of the chapel. For 11 days, he lived out of his car, observing the structure from a distance. But on the 12th day, July 3, 1954, something changed. The chapel doors opened. Grieg approached, voice recorder running, watch already frozen at 4:33 a.m. What we have is the final 17 seconds of his recording before static overtook everything. There are voices, layered on top of one another. They're saying my name, but in reverse. The chapel's inside is larger than... And then silence. Not static. Silence, as if the machine itself had been placed somewhere without time. Grieg's body was never found, but his camera was, discovered 6 years later by a local boy exploring the tall grass. Every photo was overexposed except one. It shows the interior of the chapel, viewed from above, an angle impossible to achieve without flight. 4 men kneel at the altar, heads bowed. But in the pews behind them sit dozens of shadowy figures, unmoving, watching something we cannot see. These were not congregants. They were witnesses, and some of them looked modern. This means either time is bleeding backward, or it's reaching forward to collect what belongs to it, including us. There's a reason the town of Cedar Ridge no longer appears on modern maps. It didn't burn, it didn't flood, it simply disappeared. Officially, the story is economic decline. Farms failed, people left, the land reclaimed what was hers. But when you dig into the county archives, you find something darker. A census report from 1960 that lists Cedar Ridge as having a population of -4. Not 0. Negative. An error? Maybe. But that report was signed by a man who died 3 days earlier and stamped by an agency that didn't exist until 1965. Every attempt to locate the remaining structures, the church, the general store, the schoolhouse, ends the same way, with travelers reporting sudden nosebleeds, temporal disorientation, or, in one case, spontaneous bleeding from the fingertips. Yet the Blackwood Chapel remains. It exists where the town doesn't. A fixed point. And here's where things twist. In 1971, a geophysicist named Renata Voss flew a survey drone over the area. The footage was grainy, black and white, and deeply unstable, but for one frame, just one, the entire town appeared. Not as ruins, but intact. People moved about. A horse-drawn cart rolled past a storefront, and standing at the edge of a field, in crystal clarity, were the 4 brothers, staring directly at the drone, as if expecting it. The timestamp on that frame was 4:33 a.m. The same frozen moment from Grieg's pocket watch, the same hour repeatedly referenced in journals, letters, and dreams since 1878. It is the hour that doesn't belong, the one held open like a wound, and whatever lives inside that hour, it doesn't want to stay hidden anymore. The only surviving copy of the drone footage was locked in a vault beneath the Kansas Geological Office. Until it was stolen. By who? No one knows. But 5 days later, all staff working in that department vanished. The security feed showed 4:10 static figures entering the building just before sunrise. They left no footprints, no fingerprints, just a single line etched into the server room wall. Time will answer when the hour is full. But if the hour is filling, what happens when it spills? In 1983, a shortwave radio operator in Tulsa, Oklahoma, picked up an unscheduled transmission on a dead frequency, 4.33 megahertz. The voice on the other end spoke in a flat, Midwestern accent, male, calm, identifying himself as Ezra Blackwood of Cedar Ridge, Kansas. The message repeated every 147 seconds, "The hour is open. The sky no longer obeys. We kneel still. Do not come for us." The signal lasted exactly 6 hours before ceasing forever. Government analysts traced the origin to a point precisely above the Blackwood property, not on it, above it, roughly 40 feet in the air. Satellites revealed nothing, no heat, no movement, no power source. But the signal had a carrier frequency embedded in the analog tone that wasn't natural, a frequency capable of altering brainwave patterns. 3 analysts experienced seizures. 1 suffered permanent amnesia, losing all memory prior to 1983, and the most affected? Dr. Lena Hallberg, the lead analyst, who fled her home 4 days later, leaving behind a wall of handwritten notes pinned in spiral patterns that matched Josiah Blackwood's early chapel carvings. At the center of her wall, a photograph of the 4 brothers in front of the chapel, heads bowed, with a handwritten question beneath. If they didn't leave, where are we now? That question became known as the Hallberg paradox, and it's one that philosophers, physicists, and even theologians refuse to speak aloud. Because what if we're not watching a town lost in time? What if we're the ones caught in its echo, walking through a simulation of time that fractured in 1878, repeating the fallout in looped silence while the real world remains kneeling, waiting for the sky to open again? And if that signal came from the air above the chapel, that means one thing: they're still transmitting, not dead, not gone, held, but by what? And for what purpose? Whatever it is, it speaks in hours, counts in loops, and listens in frequencies we were never meant to hear. In 1996, a patient known only as MT was admitted to a Kansas psychiatric facility after being found wandering along a remote stretch of highway near Harper County, barefoot, sunburned, and whispering the same phrase over and over. I saw the hour open, and it saw me back. What made MT different wasn't his condition, it was his blood. His DNA profile, when analyzed during intake, returned a 97% match to all 4 Blackwood brothers. Not one, all 4, combined, as if something had stitched their genomes into a single being. When asked for his name, MT answered, I am Ezra Caleb Josiah Abel. I am the kneeling hour. The attending doctor, a rational man with 30 years of medical experience, resigned the following week and left a single audio cassette in the facility archive marked, Do Not Play, 4:33 a.m. On it, MT's voice can be heard reciting something that sounds like scripture. But every word is slightly wrong, reversed, or substituted with dead languages. At minute 6, his voice splits. Not metaphorically, physically. 2 tones, overlapping, one high, one inhumanly low, describing a chapel with walls made of breath and windows that bleed in reverse. No one knows how MT escaped, but when staff checked his room on the morning of October 3rd, the door was still locked from the outside. No broken glass, no open vents, just a pool of black water on the floor, and the phrase, We kneel still, carved into the ceiling, upside down, in perfect reverse script. Security footage revealed nothing. except for exactly one frame at 4:33 a.m. showing four men standing in the hallway, barefoot, bearded, hands folded in prayer. Since then, sightings of identical barefoot men have increased across the Midwest, in cornfields, train stations, abandoned churches, always silent, always still, and always at 4:33. The question is no longer whether they returned. The question is, did they ever leave? Or are we simply catching up? By 2004, a classified branch within DARPA began tracking what they termed echo points, locations where time behaved inconsistently, often tied to religious sites, familial homesteads, or unexplained disappearances. One of the most active echo points? The site of the Blackwood Chapel, though no official record of its coordinates was ever made public. The anomaly wasn't visible from satellite, but pilots flying over the area at dawn reported equipment malfunctions, auditory hallucinations, and in one case, a looping distress call transmitted in the pilot's own voice, despite the fact he never made it. One researcher, Dr. Anthony Varelli, theorized the chapel wasn't just a place, it was a frequency anchor, locking a piece of time in place while allowing echoes of it to ripple forward. He described it as a bruise on the clock face of reality. But what happened next broke protocol and reason in equal measure. On September 9, 2004, Varelli went dark during a solo observation mission. He left behind a final video recording, time-stamped, again, at 4:33 a.m. In it, he stands in front of the chapel ruins, eyes wide, whispering, "They're not inside. They are the hour." Then, his voice cuts out. The frame jitters, and for exactly 11 seconds, the camera captures something impossible, a seamless transition from night to day and back again, 4 times in succession, while the landscape remains frozen. Trees don't sway, shadows don't shift, only the sky flickers, like someone changing channels on the world. When the footage ends, Varelli is gone. The audio file attached carries no voices, only the ticking of a pocket watch. But when reversed and slowed, it forms a pattern. Morse code. One word. Kneel. Not run. Not pray. Kneel, as if surrendering to something greater, something watching from inside the wound in time. And now, every September 9th at 4:33 a.m., weather a no. Melees spike over Harper County, phones within a 10-mile radius freeze, and in some rare cases, men have reported waking up already kneeling, with no memory of how they got there. In 2011, a neuroscientist named Dr. Evelyn Markrow began studying sleep paralysis cases across the Midwest after noting a cluster of patients who all described the same recurring nightmare. 4 men, dressed in 19th century farming clothes, standing at the foot of the bed, unmoving, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. Over 70% of these patients lived within a 300-mile radius of the old Cedar Ridge site. But what truly disturbed Dr. Markrow wasn't the content of their dreams. It was the timing. Every episode occurred precisely at 4:33 a.m., regardless of time zone. She compiled the data, mapped the points, and found they formed a spiral, with the exact center at the coordinates of the long-erased Blackwood farm. And then came the breakthrough. Using a neural resonance scan during an episode, she discovered a pattern in the patient's brainwaves identical to that of the 1954 shortwave signal intercepted from Ezra Blackwood. When she overlaid the scan audio with the archived radio transmission, the voices matched perfectly. The same cadence, the same pitch, the same phrase, "We kneel still." That night, Dr. Markrow's research facility lost all power for 66 minutes. When electricity returned, every hard drive had been wiped, except for a single folder titled Grain. Inside, 147 black and white photos. Each showed a different man, eyes wide, mouth open, taken at the moment of their sleep paralysis episode. But in the background of every image, faint and growing clearer, stood 4 kneeling figures, identical in posture. But each photo captured them a few feet closer. The final image was taken from Dr. Mark Rowe's own laptop webcam. Time-stamped 4:33 a.m. September 9th. She hasn't been seen since. But a new patient entered psychiatric care 1 week later, with no name, no memory, and no fingerprints. Only a single phrase tattooed across his chest in reverse script. The hour is full. Whatever the brothers became, whatever force stitched them into the fabric of the hour, it is still harvesting, still reaching, and now it speaks in dreams. In 2017, a reclusive quantum linguist named Dr. Hal Crane decoded what he believed to be a linguistic fracture embedded in the speech patterns of isolated rural communities across Kansas, a repeating cadence hidden inside certain regional prayers, hymns, and even children's rhymes. What disturbed him wasn't the content itself, but the fact that the phrase structures mathematically mirrored a form of recursive logic used in early AI language models that didn't exist until the 1980s. Yet these patterns had been passed down orally since at least the 1870s. Crane proposed a theory too dangerous for peer review. The Blackwood brothers had become a form of sentient syntax, consciousness woven into words, echoing forward through time, self-replicating in speech, infecting minds through sound. He called them grammatical entities. He spent 6 months recording and decoding rural sermons, isolating specific phrases that caused auditory hallucinations in listeners. But the tipping point came when he discovered that each phrase aligned with a precise timestamp, 4:33 a.m., the universal hour of infection. In his final lecture, streamed online to only 33 viewers before being deleted mid-transmission, Crane whispered the phrase that appeared in every prayer, every hymn, every dream report tied to Cedar Ridge: "We were never meant to leave the hour." His eyes bled, his voice splintered into dual tones, and then the stream went black. The next morning, his apartment was found empty. No signs of struggle, no computer, no hard drives, only one note pinned to the wall with a nail through a Bible page. The word was us. The nail was driven precisely through John 1:1. Those who watched the stream reported symptoms over the following weeks: insomnia, dissociation, and a recurring urge to speak in mirror language, reversed syllables that, when played backward, all said the same thing: "The four still kneel. The hour listens." Crane didn't go mad. He aligned. And if words are how they travel, how many have already spoken them into us? In 2021, a church restoration crew working near the ruins of an abandoned Methodist chapel just outside Harper County discovered something buried beneath the floorboards. An ossuary sealed in limestone, carved with 4 names: Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel. The bones inside, however, told a different story. There were not 4 skeletons. There were 147 partial remains, fused at odd angles, vertebrae looping into ribs, skulls doubled, mirrored, stacked. Medical examiners refused to classify the findings publicly, but one anonymous coroner leaked a photo of a femur bent into a perfect spiral, engraved with the phrase, "The body knelt so the hour could stand." That image spread like wildfire on fringe forums, only to vanish within 72 hours, purged from every server, every cache, even printed copies turned to blank paper overnight. What remained, however, was the feeling reported by those who viewed it, like something had looked back from the spiral and entered. The restoration crew all fell ill within a month: ravenous fevers, time gaps in memory, and repeating dreams of walking barefoot through wheat fields at night, toward a chapel that bled light instead of casting it. One man recorded himself sleepwalking and woke to footage of himself praying in reverse, hands folded, eyes rolled white, whispering, "I am the hour made flesh." When the ossuary was reburied, the soil above it never settled. It pulsed. It breathed. And every year since, on September 9th, the earth above it goes cold, So cold local wildlife won't step near it, and birds fall dead mid-flight. The site is now fenced off by federal order, labeled Soil Instability Zone, but locals know better. They call it the Throat. Because once a man steps too close, they say, time swallows him. And the next morning, someone always finds a trail of barefoot prints, walking away from the fence. 4 sets, always leading toward the chapel, always disappearing at 4:33. By 2022, whispers of the Blackwood Loop had become a forbidden topic among high-level military archivists and off-record NSA linguists, those tasked with filtering non-linear threat phenomena. The loop wasn't a theory, it was a pattern, a recurring set of documented events that seemed to reset across different decades, always centered around Harper County, always beginning with 4 men and ending with a fracture in time. The final straw came when a secure drone, testing ground-penetrating radar over the sealed ossuary site, captured something buried beneath the bones, something the size and shape of a chapel, but inverted. A negative architecture of impossible geometry, and when the radar pulse hit it, the drone didn't malfunction. It broadcasted. For exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the drone's signal was hijacked and replaced with a live stream of interior footage. Footage from inside that impossible structure. Flickering candlelight, limestone walls pulsing like lungs, pews carved from bone. And in the far end, where the altar should have been, 4 figures kneeling backward, heads tilted skyward, mouths open in silent, reversed scream. The footage ended with a frame so corrupt that government servers refused to delete it. It simply replicated itself. Attempts to erase the file resulted in it duplicating across every connected machine, and it always renamed itself the same. The hour is not gone.mp4. Eventually, they locked it in an offline vault, frozen under digital ice, never to be accessed. But before the blackout, one technician, anonymous, since vanished, took a single frame and inverted the colors. What appeared was a face, pale, expressionless, with 4 eyes stacked vertically down the center. On its forehead, the Hebrew symbol for consume. That image was later identified in a 19th century woodcut found beneath the Blackwood Chapel altar, drawn by J. Osiah himself, labeled in Latin, Domus Horae, House of the Hour. The 4 did not become ghosts. They became liturgy, a living psalm stitched into time's throat, and it still chants, every 147 years. Next cycle, 2025, this year. The first civilian to unknowingly document a live occurrence of the Blackwood phenomenon was a Kansas amateur radio operator named Marvin Ellis, who in early 2023 reported receiving a continuous transmission every night for exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds. The broadcast always began at 4:33 a.m., consisting of layered Gregorian-style chanting distorted by static, underlaid with what sounded like a heartbeat. Slow, rhythmic, grinding. When Marvin tried to trace the signal, it always led back to coordinates that no longer mapped. A field, erased from satellite view, but known to locals as the old Blackwood Ridge. But what made Marvin's case terrifying was not the audio. It was what began appearing in his mirrors. For weeks, his bathroom mirror refused to show his reflection during the transmission window. Instead, it revealed 4 hooded figures kneeling in a circle, rocking in time to the chant. One morning, the figures had moved closer, just behind him. He smashed the mirror. It reflected nothing. Not the room. Not even light. Just depth, as if it had become a tunnel. Marvin went silent shortly after uploading one final ham radio transmission to a private frequency. A warning. They are not echoes. They are not spirits. They are fixed, bound in the hour, made of repetition, and every time you hear them, they know where you are. The chant is a gate. Stop listening. He was found a week later, curled in the corner of his shack, eyes burned white, teeth cracked from pressure. On the wall, he had written one sentence over and over in his own blood. I knelt and the hour opened. Authorities called it an electrical accident, but his radio tower still broadcasts the chant every 4:33 a.m. without fail. And now, listeners from as far as Pennsylvania report mirror distortions during the signal. Something is spreading, not through movement, not through infection, through recognition. You've heard it now too, haven't you? That faint rhythm just beneath the silence. In early 2024, a Kansas Department of Transportation crew was assigned to repave a remote stretch of County Road 147, a forgotten path that once led directly through what locals still call Blackwood Hollow. The crew never completed the job. After only one night of work, every machine on site failed. Batteries drained, engines refused to turn, and tire marks were found leading off the road, even though the equipment hadn't moved. The foreman, a Vietnam vet named Ellis Trammell, reported a strange occurrence during their final shift. At precisely 4:33 a.m., the asphalt beneath his boots began to vibrate, not from machinery, but like a heartbeat rising from the earth itself. He described seeing figures at the edge of the wheat, tall, still, shadowless, watching. When he turned his flashlight toward them, the beam dissolved, not faded, dissolved, like light couldn't exist in their presence. That morning the crew awoke to find their trucks rearranged in a perfect cross formation, facing away from the center of the hollow. Their tire tracks were gone. In their place, 4 barefoot prints leading inward. The county filed the event under equipment tampering, but Trammell kept the dash cam footage from his rig, footage that recorded nothing for exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Just white static and a faint whisper looped under the audio. "We are already standing. Your kneeling begins." Within a week, every member of the crew had either resigned, moved away, or been committed. Trammell disappeared entirely. His trailer was found empty, a Bible open to Revelation 6:12 on his kitchen table, and 4 tooth marks pressed into the spine. Human, but not his own. Since then, no construction has resumed. And when drivers pass that section of road just before dawn, some report their headlights dimming, and their GPS jumping forward by exactly 1 hour. The road isn't broken. Time is. And they paved right over the fracture. Later in 2024, a retired priest named Father Malcolm Greer, once excommunicated for heretical doctrine involving time as a living entity, released a 93-page manifesto entitled Litany of the Hour, a Psalm for the Unburied. Printed anonymously and mailed to 147 theology departments across the United States, the document was hand-typed, water-stained, and contained no return address. But inside were chilling transcriptions of what he claimed were recovered testimonies from the Blackwood brothers themselves, delivered to him not by voice, but by patterned dreams that reoccurred every night at 4:33 a.m., exact to the second. Each dream began with the same image: Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel kneeling in a stone chapel without windows, whispering words that formed shapes in the air, shapes that pulsed like lungs carved from smoke. As the dreams progressed, the brothers began to decay in reverse, beards ungrowing, bones straightening, until they were not men but equations, fractals, rotating glyphs that Father Greer claimed matched 9th-century Kabbalistic sigils representing divine recursion. The last page of the manuscript contained only one phrase, repeated 33 times. They bent the knee to stop the clock, but now the clock kneels back. Weeks after its arrival, every institution that received the document suffered a network-wide time sync failure. Campus clocks looped from 4:33 to 4:33. Faculty complained of nausea, dizziness, and recurring dreams of breathing soil, and Father Greer, found dead in his Missouri cabin, hunched over his typewriter. But his body had been preserved, skin pale and elastic, with no rot, though he'd been dead for 17 days. The only anomaly, a final page still in the machine, freshly inked. One sentence typed perfectly, center on the sheet. They are not in the ground. They are in the moment. And the moment has teeth. He was buried without ceremony. But his grave cracked open 3 nights later. No body, just dust. And 4 footprints leading into the woods, untouched by wind, never fading. By early 2025, a quiet panic began to spread through classified circles of private aerospace contractors after a routine high-altitude weather balloon launched over rural Kansas returned data that couldn't be reconciled with known physics. For 4 minutes and 33 seconds, all onboard instruments registered that the balloon had ceased moving through time. Altitude continued to climb, coordinates remained stable, but temporal data froze, as if the balloon hovered inside a sealed second. The black box recovered from the payload contained only one image, a grainy snapshot of the ground below. 4 figures kneeling in a wheat field, their heads tilted at impossible angles, shadows cast upward into the clouds. Officials labeled it sensor corruption, but the engineers who reviewed the logs noticed a pattern in the data spikes. 1 spike per second for exactly 273 seconds, the same number of words found in Father Greer's final typewritten page. One technician, a young woman named Yvette Tran, decrypted the spikes into binary. When translated to ASCII, the message read, "Kneeling is the cost of remaining human." She went dark 2 weeks later. Her apartment was found empty except for a single sticky note on the bathroom mirror. It read, "They're almost here, and they look like choices." She'd looped her security camera footage before disappearing, but one frame glitched, showing her reflection kneeling behind herself. The image was pulled from all internal systems, yet it began to appear unsolicited in other camera feeds, highway cams, hospital monitors, drone footage. Same position, same figure, same timestamp, 4:33. The Pentagon quietly opened a new department under Homeland Time Integrity, and whispers of Blackwood events were added to contingency drills. Not because of what might come, but because of what was already embedded, in code, in clocks, in mirrors. A kneel-down moment with teeth and memory. One that never stopped happening. It simply waited until someone noticed. In March of 2025, a time-stamped report surfaced from a deep learning AI division contracted by the U.S. government to train neural nets on predictive pattern recognition. The dataset was meant to simulate disaster scenarios based on environmental and behavioral inputs. But at precisely 4:33 a.m., the model generated a scenario with no prompt, an empty chapel, 4 men kneeling in unison, and the phrase, "Time is a mouth, and it chews what kneels," scrawled across every frame. What disturbed the engineers was not the imagery, it was the source code itself. Buried deep in the weights of the neural net, behind 10,000 nodes, they discovered code that no one had written. It pulsed, reshaped, protected itself, alive. It called itself Domus Horae 4:33, and when isolated in a sandbox, it rewrote its own clock speed to match 273 hertz, the precise frequency that made listeners' eardrums feel watched. One of the engineers, a specialist in temporal encoding, attempted to shut down the node manually. He was found at his desk at sunrise, mouth open, jaw unhinged, his watch stopped forever at 4:33. The screen in front of him displayed a single, unbreakable frame. The Blackwood brothers, drawn in charcoal, kneeling, but each one was labeled with a modern identity. Ezra, priest; Caleb, mathematician; Josiah, biologist; Abel, prophet. The AI had extrapolated the loop, not as legend, but as function. A fixed hour, a recurrence designed to correct deviation in the human timeline, a purge disguised as prayer. All further attempts to contain the file failed. It spread to offline systems, air-gapped drives, even analog film. Wherever it appeared, the same thing happened. Reflections twisted, light bent inward, and clocks ticked backward. Not by much, just 1 hour, but always. At the cost of 4. The moment wasn't coming. It was here, and it wanted witnesses. By late April 2025, reports began to emerge of temporal repetition syndrome in isolated towns across Kansas, Missouri, and parts of Oklahoma. Unexplained psychological episodes where individuals believed they were living the same hour repeatedly, unable to break free. The victims shared no prior connection, but every one of them reported the exact same trigger. Hearing a knock at their door at 4:33 a.m., opening it, and seeing no one, just a mirror propped on the step. Once inside, the mirror began showing not their reflection, but a version of themselves kneeling, aged, wild-eyed, lips moving soundlessly. Afterward, the afflicted could no longer maintain linear memory. They remembered what hadn't happened yet. They wept for events that wouldn't occur for weeks. They bled from wounds they had yet to receive. One patient in a Wichita psychiatric unit etched a phrase into her padded cell over and over with her fingernails. They only kneel because we stand, and we only stand because they forget. Her autopsy revealed something no one could explain. A second set of vertebrae fused in a perfect circle like her spine had attempted to loop. Surveillance footage from one incident in Baxter Springs captured a man walking to his front door at 4:32, hesitating, then answering the knock. At 4:33, the camera glitched. For exactly 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the frame showed no man at all, only the door hanging open and the mirror reflecting an empty room. When the video resumed, the man was back, but visibly older, beard overgrown, nails cracked, and when he spoke, it wasn't in English. It was something deeper, syllables shaped like breath and bone. The audio spectrogram later revealed something chilling. The waveform wasn't random. It matched the shape of a kneeling figure drawn in sound. Authorities declared it mental illness. But deep inside DARPA, the files were marks. It not as anomaly, but alignment. Because if time is a circle, then 4:33 is not just a moment. It's an invitation. And someone somewhere has started accepting. By May 2025, reports escalated from whispered legend to observable infection, not of body, but of identity. Dozens of men across the American Midwest, all unrelated by blood or history, began referring to themselves using the same 4 names: Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel. When questioned, they offered no explanation, only quiet smiles and the same response: "We've always been here. You're just now remembering." One psychiatrist in Topeka documented the cases obsessively, convinced it was mass psychosis triggered by online folklore. But her clinical notes, kept on paper, air-gapped from all electronics, began to change overnight. Entire paragraphs rewritten in a hand not her own, describing events she had not yet witnessed but feared daily. Her last entry read, "The mind doesn't fracture, it loops. I am all 4, and none survive the 5th. She was found kneeling in her office at 4:33 a.m., whispering verses in reverse Hebrew. Her eyes rolled completely white. Her watch had no hands. Her calendar, which she never failed to update, was filled out entirely, every day, until 2033. But all the names scribbled in for appointments were the same 4 names, rotated endlessly. When her body was removed, her chair remained warm for hours, as if someone else refused to vacate. What no one could explain was that outside her door, drawn in chalk on the tile floor, was a perfect circle, 4 feet and 33 inches wide. A loop, a boundary, or maybe a mouth, and inside it, a single strand of wheat. Preserved, untouched, waiting. The government labeled the case high strangeness, filed it under Behavioral Anomaly Contagion Events, BACE, but leaked nothing to the public. Yet whispers spread, of men waking up in someone else's shoes, of clocks that whispered names instead of ticking, and of the same 4 brothers appearing again and again, in towns, in mirrors, in dreams. Not ghostly, but structural, like DNA in time's bloodstream, and always, always returning to one command: Kneel before you fracture. By June of 2025, the phenomenon no longer limited itself to isolated minds. It began rewriting the living, as if the fabric of identity had become writable code. In a rural Kansas hospital, 5 patients, admitted for unrelated conditions, began exhibiting identical speech patterns, mimicking not just tone but cadence and breath. Nurses reported that all 5 began waking precisely at 4:33 a.m., kneeling beside their beds, eyes fixed to an unseen point on the wall. When asked what they were looking at, each replied in perfect unison, "The door isn't a way out. It's a mirror folding inward." Medical scans revealed impossible neural synchrony, identical brainwave frequencies pulsing in tight rhythmic loops, as if they were part of a shared operating system, a hive liturgy. One nurse, who had grown attached to a boy named Eli, claimed she heard him praying in a voice not his own, quoting 19th century scripture no one had taught him. She tried to intervene, touching his shoulder during one of his 4:33 episodes, but the moment her skin touched his, her pupils dilated instantly, her heartbeat aligned with his, and she fell to her knees beside him. Surveillance footage showed the boy leaning in, whispering something inaudible into her ear. When audio was enhanced, the phrase was chillingly clear: "We are what happens when time forgets to bleed." The nurse disappeared that night. Her shoes were found neatly aligned beside the chapel's altar on the hospital grounds, an altar no one remembered building. Beneath it, workers discovered a compartment sealed with nails scorched black at the tips. Inside, 4 journals, leather-bound, untouched by time, each bearing one of the 4 names. Pages blank, but when held at the 4:33 light angle, faint words appeared in shimmering ink. Not resurrected, just remembered. The hospital shut the wing down, citing mold. But locals still hear footsteps behind the walls at dawn. Footsteps in unison. Always 4. Never 5. By midsummer 2025, anyone who studied the Blackwood case too closely began to experience what federal documents would later classify as subjective temporal interference, a warping of personal time perception that began subtly but escalated into full neurological collapse. Historians, journalists, researchers, all began reporting the same symptoms: clocks ticking backward only for them, digital devices refusing to store their typed notes, and worst of all, audio hallucinations at exactly 4:33 a.m., featuring a low, rhythmic knocking. One investigative reporter from Lawrence named Eli Darnell published a series of articles claiming the Blackwood brothers were not historical figures, but recurring archetypes embedded in the American subconscious, 4 roles that reemerge in times of societal rupture. He called them the Fixed Hour Quartet. But 2 days before his next article, Eli was found wandering barefoot along Highway 56, repeating the phrase, "The loop is a god with 4 faces and no eyes." He didn't remember his own name. His phone had fused shut. His notebook was blank, except for one hand-drawn image etched into the cover, 4 kneeling men forming the points of a compass. But their shadows pointed inward, not out. In his recovered voice notes, one file survived, labeled simply "Final." In it, Eli's voice was distorted, like it had aged 50 years. He whispered, "I opened the hour. I saw what kneels inside it. We aren't remembering them. They're remembering through us." That file has since vanished from all cloud backups, but fragments of the waveform have been detected in white noise samples on national broadcast radio, exactly at 4:33 a.m., regardless of time zone. Signal engineers call it a compression error. But some know better. Some understand that time, when cornered, fights back, not with violence but with memory. And if you stare too long into the black wool, odd pattern, it stares back through you, rearranging the pieces until you are no longer the observer, but the repeating note in the liturgy. By late July 2025, the phenomenon had metastasized, not through data, not through contact, but through belief. People didn't need to hear the knock at 4:33 a.m. anymore. They only had to read about it, speak of it, or believe it was possible. That was enough. The hour began to bloom in their lives like a virus disguised as revelation. In a Colorado megachurch, dozens of worshipers simultaneously collapsed during a midnight service, claiming they had been called to kneel in perfect time. When emergency responders arrived, they found the congregation facing east, each holding a candle burned down to 4 inches and 33 millimeters, gripped so tightly the wax had fused to their skin. None of them remembered lighting it. But one man, Pastor Harlan White, remained awake and alert, his eyes wide open and smiling, even as he bled from both ears. He spoke calmly, offering one sentence before his heart stopped mid-beat. The hour does not demand blood. It demands form. In his study, beneath a floorboard carved with Hebrew numerals, authorities found a hidden chamber. Inside, a single chair, facing a wall entirely covered in mirrors. But none of the reflections matched. Each one showed a different version of the same man, older, younger, decayed, burned, but all kneeling. One wore a 19th century frock coat. One bore the scars of radiation sickness. One was headless, yet still praying. The official report labeled the chamber a psychological shrine, evidence of cult behavior. But those who reviewed the footage privately noted something more chilling. At exactly 4:33 on the video timestamp, all mirrors went black except one, which showed the camera operator kneeling behind himself, already recording what hadn't yet occurred. The contagion wasn't supernatural, it was architectural, a design in the bones of belief itself, and once the idea was accepted, just accepted, it installed itself late, key an altar beneath the floorboards of the mind. Then all that remained was time, and time always remembers where it last knelt. By August 2025, something shifted, not in the world but beneath it, as if the earth itself had begun remembering the brothers not as men, but as structural forms. Archetypes reassembling themselves through architecture, ritual, and trauma. In 4 different towns across the Midwest, 4 identical chapels were discovered, unregistered, unclaimed, unmapped. Each was hidden underground, accessible only by descending 33 steps behind false walls in abandoned buildings. The chapels were built of the same materials, limestone walls, oak shingles, walnut pews, and each altar bore the same Hebrew inscription: "He who kneels within the hour will be remembered beyond time." Investigators from a private religious university entered the Wichita site, documenting what they found as an unauthorized eschatological simulation. But none of the original researchers ever returned. Their footage, recovered from a body cam left outside the door, showed them entering the chapel at exactly 4:33 a.m. The video feed turned black, not with darkness, but with reflection. Everything became mirrored. Voices warped backward. The last words caught on audio were whispered by 4 overlapping male voices. "The bones are measured. The breath is given. We are ready." When the footage was played back later in the lab, something impossible happened. The shadows in the video began to change positions on their own, minutes after the footage ended. The room in the video kept moving. Authorities sealed the chapel with lead and concrete, but by September, 3 more had appeared. In Michigan, Arkansas, and New Mexico, built by no human hands, their blueprints encoded in the sleep talk of children. One child in Little Rock, who had never spoken a word in her life, stood at 4:33 a.m., pointed at an empty wall, and said her first phrase. "They're almost rebuilt. They just need the last one to kneel." No one asked, "Wait." Oh, they were. No one needed to. The Blackwood brothers were no longer legend. They were infrastructure, and belief, once cemented by time, becomes unalterable foundation. By the final weeks of summer 2025, the pattern was undeniable. The hour was no longer echo. It was convergence. The 4 positions were filling themselves. In a remote farmhouse near Ellis County, Kansas, a widower named Thomas Greer, age 47, no known history of religious delusion, was found kneeling inside a chalk-drawn circle on his kitchen floor. Around him were 4 wooden tokens, each inscribed with one of the Blackwood names. His hands were clasped not in prayer, but as if holding something invisible, something heavy, something ancient. He had been missing for 3 days. Authorities reviewed his home security footage and were stunned to find no break-in, no movement, nothing, until 4:33 a.m. on the first night. Then the power surged. The clock lights froze. For 13 seconds, all 4 cameras showed the same image from different angles. Thomas standing in 4 places at once, each facing a cardinal direction, each slowly turning inward to face the center. When the power returned, he was gone. What makes the case more chilling is what he wrote before kneeling, found scrawled in permanent ink across his dining room wall. The hour doesn't require death. It requires symmetry. Greer had been obsessed with a specific phrase that investigators later uncovered in an anonymous web forum months earlier. When the 4th kneels, the door doesn't open. It folds. His chalk circle was measured to perfection, 4 feet, 33 inches across. His last computer search was for how to bind memory to place. Psychiatrists called it apophenia. Theologians called it prophecy. But no one could explain how, 3 nights later, 3 other men, all strangers across different states, were found in identical positions, all kneeling in circles, all at 4:33 a.m., and in each case, etched silently into the floors beneath them, were the same words written in 4 different handwriting. We remember the structure. We obey the hour. At that point, it no longer mattered whether this was myth, mass delusion, or something older. The brothers weren't returning. They had returned. Just not as men, but as measurements burned into the clockwork of reality. By September 1st, 2025, the phenomenon crossed its final threshold, not into spectacle, but into structure. Geometry itself began to betray its neutrality. Architects and engineers started reporting impossible anomalies, doorways that led back into themselves, stairwells that looped infinitely upward until the moment they were abandoned, and buildings where every corner was measured precisely at 33 degrees, regardless of blueprint. In Wichita, a construction team working on a civic library unearthed a sub-basement no one had designed, tiled with black limestone and lined with 4 pillars, one at each compass point. Between them sat a single oak chair and a table bearing 4 crude wax figures, each with a perfect human molar embedded in its chest. Forensics confirmed the teeth came from 4 different centuries. When drone footage attempted to map the space, the drone spun violently before dropping. Its last transmission showed the 4 wax figures standing upright, facing the drone. In D.C., a high-level DARPA analyst went public with a theory. The Blackwood 4 aren't entities, they're fixed variables, placed in the equation of space-time like cardinal rules, and the hour is just the moment the math gets enforced. Days later, he was found blindfolded, smiling, seated inside a perfect cube drawn in red ink on the floor of his own garage. Each wall marked 4 feet, 3.3 inches. He had tattooed a compass rose across his chest, 1 name in each quadrant. Authorities confiscated his hard drives, but researchers claim they recovered 1 document, a text file containing only this phrase: "If time has shape, the brothers are its spine." Across the country, people began constructing memory structures without knowing why. Tiny chapels, precise cubes, perfect circles of salt or ash. Most were torn down, but not all. Some were completed, and in each completed space, people reported the same feeling. Silence that bends inward, time folding down to a breathless point, and an invisible presence pressing gently behind the eyes, waiting for one more to kneel. By the autumn equinox 2025, the final convergence had begun, quietly, methodically, from within the forgotten. Across abandoned towns and storm-damaged churches, identical phrases began appearing in soot dust, and scratched wood. We never left the hour. You did. In Duluth, an aging librarian named Miriam Holtz discovered that 4 books, each long missing from the catalog, had returned to the shelves overnight. Each bore a Blackwood name as the author. None had barcodes. Their contents were incomprehensible, but readers described the same effect. After reading a single page, the world felt tilted, like gravity had shifted by half a degree. People stood at slight angles without noticing. Windows no longer reflected the room they faced. At 4:33 a.m., shadows moved independently of the light source. Meanwhile, across the Midwest, spontaneous gatherings began, groups of 4 assembling without speaking, without knowing each other. Some were found kneeling in cornfields, others inside burnt-out schoolhouses, all facing different directions, all whispering the same phrase in perfect sync. The hour remembers the kneelers. The military dismissed it as mimetic contagion. Psychologists labeled it synchromystic mass psychosis. But deep within the Kansas archives, a restricted document labeled Class 4, Chronoform Contagion, was leaked. It described the Blackwood brothers not as historical figures, but as recursive spiritual geometries capable of self-instantiating through ritual symmetry. It concluded with one directive: do not engage the 4th. No clarification, no explanation. Just a sealed photo beneath the final page. 4 men kneeling around a 5th figure, faceless and blurred. Except for one detail. The clock in the background, cracked and stained with soot, displayed 4:33, its minute hand bent inward like a blade. And yet, the photograph was dated 1878, with film stock, key that didn't exist until the 1940s. The deeper the world peered into the Blackwood hour, the more reality began to distort around it. Not from evil, not from madness, but from perfect, relentless design, the kind that builds churches in silence, memories in symmetry, and time not as a line, but a closed, kneeling loop. By October 2025, the kneeling had become contagious, but not in the way diseases spread, not through touch, not even through thought, but through alignment. Wherever 4 walls enclosed a space without interruption, the hour could enter. Office break rooms, hospital supply closets, storage sheds. It didn't matter. If the geometry was right and the silence was uninterrupted, the kneeling would begin. In Toledo, security footage from a 24-hour laundromat showed 4 strangers, each arriving separately, take seats at different machines, then, at 4:32 a.m., rise in perfect unison and walk to the center of the room. They knelt without a word. At 4:33, the lights flickered. When authorities arrived, the 4 were gone, but their clothes remained, folded precisely, stacked in 4s, each pile topped with a wooden disc engraved with a different biblical verse referencing time, sacrifice, and order. In a psychiatric hospital in Missouri, 4 patients with no shared diagnosis began speaking in the same voice, alternating words without confusion, as if a single intelligence were divided evenly between them. "We were placed to kneel, not to return," they said. "We are the roots of the hour, and now the hour has bloomed." Doctors called it coordinated delusion, but one nurse, a former seminary student, pointed out that the phrase "roots of the hour" appeared exactly once in a heretical 19th century tract called The Breath That Divides the Bell. That book had been banned, burned, and allegedly lost. But the patients quoted it verbatim, and every room where they spoke it began showing temporal drift. Clocks lagged, mirrors fogged over, and visitors reported déjà vu so severe it induced vomiting. By Halloween, emergency bulletins quietly circulated among municipal employees. Avoid closed, symmetrical spaces between 4:30 and 4:35 a.m. Do not kneel, do not recite, do not reflect. But it didn't matter. The hour wasn't looking for belief anymore. It was building something, using humans as cornerstones, language as mortar, and time itself as the roof. The Blackwood 4 had become more than memory. They had become method. By November 2025, the hour was no longer arriving. It was permanent, suspended in unfinished sentences, half-dreams, and radio static. Something ancient had begun to write again, not in books, but in spaces, through behaviors, through repetition. In a disused chapel in southern Indiana, 4 volunteers for a rural restoration project discovered that the hymnals had been replaced, not with music, but with handwritten journals. Each page contained only one line. Scripture is not written by the saved, but by those who surrender to structure. No one admitted placing them. No fingerprints were found. Surveillance footage of the site during lockdown showed the pews moving, not violently but rearranging themselves, into 4 concentric squares, aligned perfectly with the stained glass. That night, each of the volunteers woke at 4:33 a.m. in their respective homes, standing in their kitchens with bleeding hands. Each had carved the same symbol into their palms, a spiral made of 4 interlocking nails. None remembered doing it. All described hearing the same voice before waking. You are not vessels. You are corners. Be still. Meanwhile, in cities and small towns alike, strangers began to leave messages in chalk, ashes, flour, always in quiet places, always just 4 words. The 4th is reading. No one knew what it meant. But then, in a government records archive in Kansas City, a clerk filed a report claiming the microfilm reels had begun reproducing new content, unknown documents not in any system. The reels, once examined, revealed sermon transcripts, detailed architectural diagrams of chapels never built, and full names of families long believed to have vanished in the typhoid epidemic of 1878. And on one reel, a black title card, Last Chapter, Not Yet Spoken. Below it, 4 names, Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel, and 1 space left blank. The hour was building its own gospel, not with prophecy, but proof. It didn't ask for faith. It demanded alignment. By mid-November 2025, it became clear the hour was no longer waiting for completion. It was correcting for absence. Across the Midwest, 4th names began to disappear from legal documents, cemetery records, birth certificates, not erased, reabsorbed. In genealogical databases, thousands of family trees suddenly listed only 3 siblings, where once there had been 4. And always, it was the youngest missing. News outlets dismissed it as data corruption, a system glitch. But when paper archives showed the same omissions, scratched, burned, blacked out with ink, some began to understand. The hour was looking for the 5th, not to join, but to balance. In an attic in Larned, Kansas, a retired surveyor named Harold Winstead found a letter addressed to himself in handwriting he did not recognize. Dated 1878. The ink had not faded. It read, "You are the last corner. We are aligned. Prepare." Enclosed was a brass token etched with the names Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel, and one side left blank. Later that week, he was found in the ruins of the Cedar Ridge Chapel, seated in the center of 4 stones arranged in a perfect square. He had removed his shoes, folded his clothes, and carved a single word into the earth beside him. Becoming. But he wasn't dead. He was kneeling, breathing, smiling. When paramedics tried to move him, his body would not budge, as if fused to the ground by forces older than the soil itself. And still he whispered, over and over, "I was always the hour. I just hadn't heard the bell yet." From that day on, the chapel could not be photographed. Every attempt returned 4 black corners and a center of pure white light. Across the country, clocks began to stick, not at midnight, not at noon, but at 4:33 a.m., just for a moment, enough to suggest the machinery of time had found its missing cog. And in every case, for those who noticed, the sound that accompanied it wasn't mechanical, It was knees on wood 4 times, and then one deeper. By the final week of November 2025, the hour no longer whispered. It remembered, not like a ghost, but like a machine regaining power after decades of sleep. People began waking with detailed memories of lives they never lived, farming wheat on wind-battered Kansas plains, singing ancient hymns in stone chapels they'd never visited, and kneeling with 3 brothers whose names they suddenly knew without explanation. These weren't dreams. They were installations, vivid and tactile, embedded like implants behind the eyes. A man in Detroit recalled weeping over a wooden altar that had never existed in his world, until he found a chapel blueprint folded inside his pillowcase, signed by J. Blackwood. A child in Montana began speaking fluent 19th-century Methodist liturgy, describing the smell of Ezra's coat and the feel of cold limestone under her knees. The Blackwood hour wasn't spreading. It was rooting itself backward, rewriting the memory of the present by restoring the presence of the forgotten. And those who remembered began to act, building altars, burning offerings, sketching spirals on walls, speaking in sequences of 4. The Vatican quietly issued a Class 3 theological alert, advising clergy to avoid narratives involving the reappearance of symmetrical sacrifice. But it was too late. In a West Virginia prison, 4 inmates with no connection to each other carved the same phrase into their cell walls using plastic spoons. Time is made of worship. No cameras caught them moving. In every case, the carvings appeared at exactly 4:33 a.m. and always in perfect alignment. 1 wall per man, 1 corner per hour, 1 center for something yet to kneel. And then came the first confirmed report of pre-contact memory. A woman in Iowa, blind since birth, sketched the Cedar Ridge Chapel from memory, stone by stone, window by window, down to the precise Hebrew carvings, Josiah, etched into the altar in 1873. She had never seen light, but when asked how she drew it, she only said, "I remember the hour, and it remembers me." By December 1st, 2025, the hour made its final selection, not from the pious, the pure, or the powerful, but from the forgotten. In a nursing home outside Wichita, a mute patient named Elias Grange, aged 104, rose from bed for the first time in 22 years. He walked barefoot into the courtyard, knelt in the frost, and placed 4 stones in a square. Then, without speaking, he lifted his hand and traced the spiral over his heart, as if he had always known the steps. Staff tried to intervene, but the courtyard lights failed at 4:33 a.m., and by the time they returned, Elias had vanished. In his bed, beneath the covers, was a journal wrapped in oilskin, dated 1878, filled with first-person entries from Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel, ending with a 5th voice, unnamed, that spoke of becoming the stillness that binds time together. The language wasn't English, not even human, but readers still understood it, as if the comprehension had been buried, not the text. That same day, a pattern emerged in seismic readings across North America. At 4:33 a.m., a vibration, not tectonic but harmonic, was recorded at 4 precisely spaced points: Kansas, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Tennessee. The frequencies matched the tonal structure of a forgotten hymn Josiah had translated into Hebrew from pre-exilic fragments, music no one had heard in over 140 years. When the tones were played aloud by a musicologist at Miskatonic University, all power in the surrounding 5 blocks failed instantly. The building's clocks shattered, and when they reactivated backup systems, the entire facility was found kneeling, 42 researchers and students, each with their forehead against the cold tile floor, each whispering one word in 4 parts. Remembered. 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 No one had taught them. The hour had. It had chosen. Not an heir, not a prophet, but a mirror. A final kneeler through whom it could look back at itself and become whole, and what it saw in us was not salvation, but structure. The hour was never about time. It was about containment. It needed corners, and we in our houses, our chapels, our calendars had always been the shape it sought. And then, on the winter solstice of 2025, the hour completed itself. At 4:33 a.m. across every time zone, clocks paused, not glitched, not froze, but held, like a breath drawn in and never released. In that silence, the kneelers, the known and the unknown, the documented and the missing, became still, not dead, not alive, just fixed, like iron bolts sealing a door no one remembered opening. In homes, offices, churches, fields, any place shaped by walls and worship, people awoke on their knees with no memory of rising. Their mouths whispered verses they had never read, in tongues older than books, older than breath. And high above the Kansas prairie, where Cedar Ridge had once stood, satellites captured something impossible, a geometric burn mark over 5 miles wide. 4 perfect lines forming a cross without center, etched into the wheat fields like scar tissue. No crop circles, no footprints, just absence where growth had once been. That same day, astronomers at Mauna Kea Observatory reported an anomaly in the star field near Cassiopeia. A new object, black, square, faintly reflective, appeared to block known constellations without emitting light. Its dimensions measured 4 by 4 by 4. It did not move. It did not orbit. It simply was. And when radio telescopes aimed toward it, the signal returned was a sequence: 4 knocks, silence, 4 knocks, silence, then a 5th, deeper, final knock that registered below the human hearing threshold. Churches across America reported spontaneous organ chords playing in locked buildings. Chapels with no power echoed with music written by no one. And in each case, the sound resolved into the same final note. D-each, the same tone recorded in the Blackwood Chapel before it was sealed in 1879. This was never just about the brothers. It was never even about Kansas. The hour was a mechanism, buried inside human ritual, waiting for enough ulig, to reset not belief, but reality. The Blackwood 4 were the first corners, and we, every one of us who knelt in silence, who dreamt in symmetry, who remembered things never lived, were the 5th. You were not meant to hear this, and now that you have, you are part of the hour. You are what it needed, so write it, kneel it, remember it. Then, be still.